We all know the feeling of starting a new RPG. Those first hours are exciting. Every battle feels fresh, quests unfold with purpose, and rewards arrive at just the right pace. You're leveling up quickly, unlocking new abilities, and the story feels alive. But then, the rhythm changes. Progress slows. The next quest demands a higher level, or that rare weapon requires dozens of repetitive fights. The XP bar crawls forward, and enemies start to feel familiar, and what once felt like an adventure begins to resemble a routine. That moment, when progress turns into repetition, is what players call grinding. So then, what is grinding exactly? Grinding in RPGs refers to the repeated performance of tasks that add very little variety or narrative weight, fighting the same enemies, farming materials, or replaying quests, done mainly to gain experience points, currency, or gear. It is often criticized as artificial padding, stretching the length of a game without offering new challenges or meaningful content. In these moments, progression begins to feel less like discovery and more like routine, where the player's effort no longer matches the sense of reward. The excitement of leveling up or unlocking abilities is replaced by monotony, as repetition overshadows immersion. While some players find comfort in the rhythm of grinding, especially when it leads to mastery or rare rewards, many see it as a design flaw that turns adventure into obligation. This raises the question of how these grinding mechanics actually take shape within the RPG design. Grinding takes shape in RPGs through several design patterns that gradually shift play from adventure into repetition. One common form is the XP wall, where main quests are locked until the player reaches a certain level, forcing them to repeat side content or battles to catch up. Another is the low drop rate system, where rare items require dozens or even hundreds of attempts, turning excitement into frustration. Many games also rely on repetitive side quests, fetch missions, kill counts, or resource collection that add little narrative or mechanical variety. Some titles introduce artificial time gates, such as daily resets or weekly limits, stretching progression across long periods. And in certain cases, grinding is deliberately tied to monetization hooks, where the slow pace nudges players towards buying XP boosters or premium items. Together, these mechanics illustrate how grinding is not a single feature but a collection of design choices that shape the player's journey. This makes us wonder when grinding became such a debated issue in RPGs and how its role has shifted over time. Grinding has been a part of RPGs since their earliest days, with titles like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy requiring players to repeat battles to gain strength before facing tougher challenges. Back then, it was often seen as a natural extension of limited design space and hardware constraints. As RPGs grew larger and more complex, especially with the rise of open-world formats, grinding became more noticeable and more debated. By the 2010s and into the 2020s, the conversation intensified as live service models leaned heavily on repetitive content to sustain long playtimes. Systems like gacha mechanics introduced endless cycles of resource farming to unlock characters, while battle passes tied progression to daily or weekly tasks, making grinding feel like an obligation rather than a choice. What was once accepted as tradition began to feel like deliberate design, sparking criticism from players who saw it as exploitative rather than engaging. Today, in the mid-2020s, grinding is one of the most discussed aspects of RPG design, with communities questioning whether it serves immersion or undermines it. Naturally, this leads us to ask where grinding appears most often and in what kinds of systems it has become most visible. Grinding most often appears in the systems that sit at the core of RPG progression. It shows up in combat loops, where players must repeat battles to gain levels before advancing the story. It's present in resource farming, where materials for crafting or upgrading require long hours of collection. Many games embed grinding into side quests and optional content, padding out the world with repetitive objectives that feel more like chores than adventures. In online and live service RPGs, grinding is especially visible in daily tasks, battle passes, and seasonal events, where progress is tied to consistent repetition over weeks or months. In gacha-based RPGs, grinding has become a cycle of farming currency or items to unlock new characters, often with intentionally low drop rates. Across these systems, grinding is not confined to one genre or era. It is woven into the very structure of how RPGs deliver progression. This invites the question of why developers rely on it and what purpose it serves in the RPG design. Developers rely on grinding for several reasons, most of which are tied to the structure and economics of RPG design. At its core, grinding extends playtime, ensuring that players spend more hours in the game world. It also creates a sense of progression pacing, where advancement feels earned rather than immediate. For some, this repetition builds mastery and familiarity with mechanics, reinforcing the identity of the RPG as a long-form experience. However, grinding also serves practical business purposes. In subscription-based or live service models, it keeps players engaged for weeks or months. In gacha systems, it drives repeated resource farming to unlock characters, while battle passes tie progression to daily or weekly tasks, encouraging consistent logins. These structures are not accidental. They are deliberate design choices that balance engagement, retention, and monetization. Yet, they raise the question of whether grinding enriches the adventure or simply prolongs it. This raises another issue. Who truly benefits from grinding? The player, the developer, or both? The question of who benefits from grinding reveals a tension between player and developer interests. For developers, grinding ensures longer engagement, keeping players invested in the game world, and in many cases is tied to monetization systems such as gacha pools or battle passes. It provides a predictable structure for retention, where repetition translates into steady activity and revenue. For players, the benefits are far more mixed. Some enjoy the sense of mastery and accomplishment that come from overcoming repetition, or the thrill of finally earning a rare item after hours of effort. Others find comfort in the routine, treating grinding as a meditative or background activity. Yet many players feel the balance favors the developer, with grinding serving business goals more than player enjoyment. This divide highlights a central debate. Is grinding a meaningful part of the RPG journey, or a mechanic that primarily benefits the creators? With all that being said, what impact does grinding have on the overall player experience, and how does it shape the way RPGs are remembered? The impact of grinding reaches beyond simple repetition. It fundamentally alters how players engage with RPGs. When progression slows to a crawl, the sense of adventure can collapse into obligation, turning vibrant worlds into mechanical routines. This shift doesn't just affect moment-to-moment enjoyment, it reshapes the player's memory of the game itself. Titles once praised for their stories or mechanics may instead be remembered for the hours lost to repetitive farming. Grinding also influences community perception. Reviews often highlight whether a game respects the player's time, and excessive repetition can tarnish a franchise's reputation. On a deeper level, grinding changes the psychology of play. It can foster resilience and patience, but it can also breed frustration, burnout, and disengagement. In live service RPGs, where battle passes and gacha loops amplify repetition, the impact extends to social dynamics. Players feel pressured to keep pace with friends or risk falling behind. Ultimately, grinding doesn't just stretch playtime, it defines whether an RPG is cherished as a journey or criticized as a chore. Which brings us to what solutions could reduce grinding while still preserving progression and enjoyment. If grinding is defined by repetition, shaped by design mechanics, and justified by pacing or monetization, then solutions must address each of these layers directly. One approach is dynamic scaling, where enemy strength and rewards adjust to the player's level, reducing the need to artificially grind for XP walls. Another is meaningful side content, ensuring that optional quests and tasks contribute to story or character development rather than serving as a filler. A third solution is transparent reward systems, where drop rates and progression paths are clearly communicated, removing the frustration of hidden odds in gacha or loot farming. Fourth, developers can implement alternative progression paths such as skill-based challenges, puzzle solving, or exploration bonuses, so advancement isn't locked behind combat repetition alone. Finally, player-centric pacing tools like adjustable difficulty, optional XP boosters earned through play, or flexible battle pass structures allow players to tailor the grind to their own enjoyment rather than feeling forced into a rigid loop. Together, these solutions tackle the what, repetition, the how, mechanics like XP walls, drop rates, and battle passes, and the why, developer goals of retention and monetization, and offers ways to preserve progression without sacrificing immersion. Grinding has always been a part of RPGs, shaping how players progress, how developers design, and how communities debate the balance between effort and reward. At its best, it can provide rhythm, mastery, and a sense of accomplishment. At its worst, it can drain immersion, stretch patience, or turn adventure into obligation. The solutions we explored show that grinding doesn't have to be inevitable. It can be redesigned into something more meaningful, where progression respects both the player's time and the developer's vision. After all that I have just said, I would like you to ask yourself, if grinding shapes both the journey and the memory of an RPG, should we view it as a wasted time to be cut away, or as a design element that can be transformed into something meaningful? Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.